The morning I realized my best work friend had been wearing a mask for 3 years, I was standing in the hallway outside the boardroom, holding a coffee I could no longer taste, listening to her present my entire 5-year growth strategy, word for word, to the executive panel that was supposed to be evaluating me. And she didn't even flinch. That's the part that still gets me when I think about it. The absolute stillness on her face. No guilt. No hesitation. Just polished, practiced confidence built entirely on the foundation I had spent 8 months constructing in my own blood and late nights and missed dinners. I want you to understand something before we go any further. I am not a dramatic person. I don't spiral. I don't catastrophize. I don't assume the worst in people without evidence. I am, or at least I was, the kind of woman who defaulted to trust. Who believed that working hard in silence was enough. Who told herself that loyalty was always returned eventually. I was wrong. And the education I got inside that glass-walled boardroom on a Tuesday morning in March changed every single thing about how I move through this world. My name doesn't matter. What matters is the story. What matters is that this happens, in offices, in conference rooms, in Slack threads and shared Google Docs, to women every single day. And most of them never say a word about it. I'm saying every word. I came to Hartwell and Crane Analytics the way most ambitious women arrive at their first real opportunity, slightly underpaid, deeply determined, and willing to work twice as hard to prove they belonged there. I was 29 years old with a master's in business analytics, 2 years at a mid-level consulting firm under my belt, and a hunger that I'd spent my entire life learning to disguise as quiet professionalism. Women in corporate spaces learn that very quickly. Hunger reads differently on us. Ambition needs to be wrapped in the right packaging or it makes people uncomfortable. So I wore my hunger neatly. I came in early and stayed late, but I smiled about it. I took on extra projects and always called them opportunities. I made my managers feel like their ideas were brilliant even when I had already thought of them 3 weeks earlier. Hartwell and Crane was a mid-sized analytics and business consulting firm, about 300 employees across 4 floors. The kind of place where the right promotion could genuinely launch a career. Senior analyst to strategy lead was the jump everyone was watching. It came with a 30% salary increase, a seat at the leadership table, and, maybe most importantly, visibility at the executive level. I had wanted that promotion for 2 years. I had been working toward it for 18 months in a real, measurable, deliberate way. And I had been talking about it, in detail, to exactly one person. Her name was Diane. Diane and I had started at Hartwell and Crane within 3 months of each other. She was in client strategy, I was in data analytics. Our desks were diagonal from each other in the open-plan office on the 2nd floor, and for a long time we orbited each other the way new colleagues do, polite, curious, professionally warm. Then one late Thursday evening, everyone else had gone home, and we were both still there. Her with a client deck that wouldn't cooperate. Me with a quarterly model that was giving me numbers that made no sense. We ordered delivery. We complained about the ventilation system. We laughed for the first time. That was the beginning. Over the next 2 years, Diane became the person I talked to about everything. Work stress. Difficult managers. The constant low-grade exhaustion of being a woman in a room full of men who spoke first and thought second. She was sharp and funny, and she had this way of listening that made you feel completely understood. I trusted her completely. That is the sentence I return to most often when I try to understand what happened. I trusted her completely. We had lunch together almost every day. We vented about the same things, the way credit floated towards certain people effortlessly, the way we had to construct airtight arguments just to suggest a process change, the way our male colleagues could walk into a room half-prepared and still somehow command it. We supported each other's wins loudly and genuinely. Or so I believed. When I got recognized for a client retention model that saved Hartwell and Crane a significant account, Diane was the first one to hug me. When she landed a difficult client in a competitive pitch, I brought her flowers to her desk. This is what I want you to understand about betrayal in the workplace: it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a warning or a red flag that you can point to later and say, "There, that was the moment I should have known." It lives inside something that looks exactly like friendship. It grows in the warm, safe space you created for it. And by the time you see it for what it is, you've already handed it everything it needed. About 8 months before my promotion review cycle, I began working on what I privately called the recalibration strategy. It was a comprehensive growth framework for Hartwell and Crane's analytics division, not something they had asked for, but something I believed in deeply. I had identified 3 areas where the company was hemorrhaging potential: underutilized client data, siloed departmental communication, and a reactive rather than predictive approach to account management. I built a full model. I created projections. I designed an implementation roadmap with phase timelines, resource allocations, and risk mitigation plans. It was, without any arrogance, the best work I had ever done. And I told Diane about every piece of it. That's how trust works, isn't it? You share the things you're proud of with the people you love. You think out loud with them. You workshop your ideas in conversation because that's how ideas get better. I shared my framework with Diane over lunch, over coffee, over evening venting sessions when the office was empty. I walked her through the logic. I explained the projections. I showed her the slides I was refining. She asked thoughtful questions. She offered small suggestions. She said, more than once, "This is going to change everything for you. They're going to have to promote you." I believed her. Before I keep going, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest in the comments. Have you ever trusted someone at work so completely that you shared your biggest ideas with them? Someone you thought was genuinely in your corner? Because what's coming next is the reason so many of us start keeping our ambitions private, and I want to know if you've felt that shift too. The promotion review cycle opened in February. I submitted my formal interest, received confirmation, and was told the executive panel would schedule individual presentations in March. This was the standard process: each candidate would present their vision for the strategy lead role, and the panel would evaluate based on that presentation alongside performance history. I had 8 weeks to polish what I had already spent 8 months building. I was not nervous. I was ready. Diane also submitted her interest for the same role. I knew this. It wasn't a secret. We had actually talked about it, one of those mature, honest conversations that I look back on now with a completely different understanding. She had said she was going to try, that she didn't expect to get it, that she mostly wanted the experience of the formal process. I believed that too. I believed everything. The presentations were scheduled alphabetically, which meant Diane went the morning before me. I remember sitting at my desk that Tuesday, going through my slides one final time, when I heard the boardroom door open down the hall. Diane's session was wrapping up. I wasn't listening closely, I had my own thoughts to manage, until I heard a phrase that stopped my hands on my keyboard. Predictive account management shift to replace the reactive model currently in place. I looked up. The boardroom door was open slightly. Diane's voice carried. 3-phase implementation beginning with data integration across siloed departments. My stomach dropped. I stood up slowly. I walked toward the hallway. I don't know what I expected to find. Some other explanation. A coincidence. Something that would make sense. But through the glass wall of the boardroom, I could see Diane at the presentation screen. And on that screen, formatted differently, colored in her palette, labeled with her name, was my framework. Not inspired by it. Not similar to it. Mine. The 3 core problem areas. The solution model. The phase roadmap. The projected outcomes. Even 2 of the specific data points I had pulled and compiled myself were there, dressed up in different fonts but identical in substance. She had taken my strategy. My 8 months of work. My promotion. And she was delivering it to the executive panel with the calm confidence of someone who believed she had gotten away with it. I walked back to my desk. I sat down. I stared at my screen. And I made a decision in that moment that surprised even me. I did not storm into that boardroom. I did not send an emergency message to HR. I did not call her out in the hallway when she walked past me 20 minutes later with a bright smile and said, "Your turn soon. You've got this." I smiled back. Because something had switched off inside me, the part that defaulted to trust, the part that assumed good faith, the part that would have confronted the situation directly and hoped for a fair outcome. In its place, something else had switched on. Something much colder. Much smarter. If you felt your chest tighten just now, if you felt that particular kind of rage that only comes from recognizing something you've lived, tap that like button. Not for the algorithm. For every woman who has ever smiled back at the person who just stabbed them, because she was smart enough to know that the real response needed to wait. My presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. That gave me approximately 18 hours. The first thing I did when I got home that night was open my laptop and pull up every document, every email, every timestamped draft and version history that existed for my recalibration strategy. I had been meticulous about saving my work, not out of suspicion, just out of habit. I used cloud backups, document versioning, and dated email drafts I'd sent to myself as notes. The paper trail was extensive. I had emails where I referenced specific elements of the strategy as far back as July of the previous year. I had a shared document, one I had opened to Diane at her request to read through more carefully, that showed my original edits and her subsequent read timestamps. I had, completely by accident, built the perfect case. Then I did something I had never done before in my professional life. I called Marcus. Marcus was a senior director at Hartwell and Crane, not my direct supervisor, but someone I had worked with closely on 2 major projects and had enormous respect for. He was also, I knew, someone with direct access to the executive panel and a reputation for taking process integrity seriously. It was 9:30 at night. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. Calmly. Precisely. Without tears or dramatics. I laid out the timeline, the evidence, and what I had witnessed that morning. I told him I was presenting the following morning and I intended to present my actual work, the original, documented work, and I wanted him to be aware of the situation before I walked into that room. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Send me everything tonight. Every timestamp you have." I sent it all. I also did something else that night. I revised my presentation. Not because my strategy wasn't strong, it was. But I added something new. A 4th phase that I had been sitting on, a refinement I hadn't shared with anyone, a data integration component that elevated the entire framework from impressive to genuinely transformational. If Diane had stolen my foundation, I was going to build a penthouse on top of it that she had never seen. I worked until 2 in the morning. I went to bed for 4 hours. I woke up and I dressed like someone who already had the job. I want to pause here for just a moment, because I think it's important to name what I was feeling that morning, not just the strategy, but the inside of it. There is a very specific kind of pain that comes from being betrayed by a woman you trusted in a workspace that already made you fight twice as hard for half the recognition. It's not just the professional injury. It's the personal one. It's realizing that the friendship, the lunches, the late-night venting, all of it was potentially operating on a different frequency than you thought. That while you were being genuine, you were also being studied. It makes you question your own judgment in a way that's uniquely destabilizing. And yet there was also something else present that morning, something that I think is important to name because it doesn't get talked about enough. I was not destroyed. I was activated. Something about being forced to fight for what was already mine, to document and prove and strategize under pressure, had stripped away every remaining shred of the softness I'd been using to cushion my ambition. What was left underneath was harder and more focused than anything I had accessed before. I was going to walk into that boardroom and I was going to be extraordinary. Not for them. Not even entirely against her. For myself. For the 8 months of work that deserved to be seen. We're at the midpoint of this story and the boardroom moment is coming, and I need you with me for all of it. If you're not subscribed to Pulse Reader yet, right now is the moment. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because these stories, the ones about women who refuse to stay down, this is exactly what this channel is built for. Now let's go back in. The executive panel consisted of 4 people: the Chief Strategy Officer, the VP of Analytics, a board-appointed external evaluator, and the Head of Talent Development. Marcus was not on the panel. But he was in the building. I walked into the boardroom at 10 o'clock exactly. I set up my laptop. I connected to the presentation screen. I thanked them for their time. And then I began. I opened with the problem, the 3 core vulnerabilities in Hartwell and Crane's current analytics approach. I framed them with precision, supported by data that I named the sources for, step by step. About 4 minutes in, I noticed the CSO, a woman named Patricia, lean slightly forward. She had a stillness about her that I read as recognition. She had heard something like this recently, and she was paying close attention to how my version compared. I kept going. When I reached phase 3 of my implementation roadmap, I paused deliberately. I said, I want to note that this framework has been in active development since July of last year. I have version-controlled documentation for every component, including early-stage drafts dated to last summer, if the panel requires verification of origin. A brief silence. The VP of Analytics, a careful, methodical man named Richard, made a note. I moved into Phase 4. And I watched the room change. Phase 4 was the component no one had seen. A dynamic data-sharing infrastructure that would allow the analytics and client strategy divisions to operate from a unified real-time model, eliminating the information lag that was costing Hartwell and Crane response speed on competitive accounts. I had the projections. I had the cost-benefit analysis. I had a pilot program proposal that could be operational within 90 days. Patricia sat back in her chair. The external evaluator stopped typing and just watched me. I finished cleanly. I thanked them. I answered every question they asked with the quiet confidence of someone who had built every word they were standing on. When I walked out, Marcus was in the hallway. He gave me the smallest nod. What happened next unfolded over the following 4 days, and I will tell you what I know of it, which is most of it, because Marcus was generous enough to keep me informed of what he could share. Sometime between my presentation and the following morning, the panel reviewed the documentation Marcus had submitted on my behalf the night before. The time-stamped emails. The version histories. The shared document access log showing Diane's engagement with my strategy framework in December, 2 full months before her presentation. There was an internal process conversation. Diane was called into a meeting with HR and the head of talent development. I was not in that meeting. I do not know exactly what was said. What I know is that on Friday of that week, I was called into Patricia's office. She didn't make me wait long. She told me the panel had completed their evaluation. She told me the role of strategy lead was being offered to me effective the following Monday. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "We also want to discuss an expanded scope for the position, particularly around the Phase 4 component you presented. That infrastructure proposal is something the executive team wants to move forward with, and we'd like you to lead it." The role I was being offered wasn't just the strategy lead position I had applied for. It was something larger. It was being built, in real time, around the work I had done and the vision I had demonstrated. I thanked her. I stood up. I shook her hand. I did not cry until I got to the stairwell. Here's what I want to know, and I want real answers in the comments. Do you think I should have confronted Diane directly before going to Marcus? Or did keeping my composure and letting the evidence speak make it more powerful? Because I've asked myself this question 100 times, and I still think about what I would tell a younger version of myself facing the same moment. Tell me what you think. Diane was not terminated. I want to be honest about that, because I know what you're expecting and I think the reality is actually more instructive than the clean version. She was formally reprimanded. The promotion process was noted as compromised. She was moved to a different team, not fired, but repositioned in a way that removed her from the leadership track she had tried to shortcut her way onto. And I became her organizational superior. Not by design. Not as deliberate punishment. Simply because the role I was offered sat above hers in the new structure. I saw her in the elevator on my second Monday in the new position. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully decode, somewhere between humiliation and something that might have been, in another life, an apology. I said good morning. I meant it professionally. I had no interest in cruelty. But I also had no interest in pretending. We were not friends. We had not been what I thought we were. And I was done making room in my chest for relationships that were built on versions of me that were convenient for someone else. The thing about surviving a betrayal like this, especially in a professional context, is that it rewrites more than just your relationship with the person who did it. It rewrites your relationship with yourself. I became more deliberate about what I shared and with whom. Not paranoid, I want to be clear about that distinction. Paranoia would have meant closing myself off entirely, assuming the worst in everyone, making my workspace smaller and colder to protect myself. That's not what happened. What happened is that I became discerning. I learned the difference between colleagues and confidants. I learned to keep my biggest ideas close until they were ready to be seen on my terms, in a room, under my name, with my voice carrying them. I learned that trust is not something you extend automatically. It is something that is built, slowly, through evidence. I also learned something about my own capacity that I don't think I would have accessed any other way. Under the worst possible pressure, in the middle of betrayal, with my work stolen and my opportunity at risk, I had been strategic. I had been composed. I had built a fourth phase at 2 in the morning and walked into that boardroom and been extraordinary. I would not have known I could do that if Diane hadn't forced me to find it. I don't thank her for it. Let me be very clear, what she did was a calculated betrayal of genuine friendship and professional ethics, and it deserved every consequence it received. But what I found inside it, that belongs to me entirely. The recalibration strategy, my framework, with my name finally on it, was formally adopted by Hartwell and Crane's executive team 6 months after I took the strategy lead position. The Phase 4 infrastructure pilot launched on time. It reduced client response latency by 38% in its first quarter. The external evaluator from my presentation panel reached out personally to congratulate me. Patricia told me, in a quarterly review, that my first year in the role had exceeded every metric they had set. I sat at the head of a strategy table in the same boardroom where I had stood in the hallway, unable to taste my coffee, listening to someone else wear my work. And I thought about every woman who had done what I had done, worked in silence, trusted too freely, handed someone their best self on the warm plate of genuine friendship, and never gotten the moment I was sitting in. This one is for them too. If this story hit you somewhere real, if it reminded you of something you've carried, or someone you trusted who didn't deserve it, or a version of yourself you left behind in an office that didn't see you, please like this video and subscribe to Pulse Reader. These stories exist because they're real, and because silence doesn't serve us anymore. Every like tells the algorithm that stories like this matter. Every subscriber is another woman who gets to hear them. Here's what I know now that I didn't know the morning I stood in that hallway. Your work carries your fingerprints even when someone else holds it up to the light. Your documentation matters. Your timestamps matter. Your version histories and your dated drafts and your evidence matter, not because you should live in suspicion, but because the world you operate in sometimes requires you to be your own best advocate in ways that go beyond simply doing excellent work. Your composure is a weapon. Not coldness, composure. The ability to take in a devastating moment and choose how to respond rather than simply reacting. That choice is power. And your ambition, the real, large, unashamed version of it, belongs to no one but you. Don't loan it out in ways that cost you more than the connection is worth. I spent years softening myself to fit into spaces that would have accepted me better if I had simply been louder and more deliberate from the start. I'm not soft anymore. Not hard, either. Just exact. I know what I'm building and I know who I'm building it with. And I walk into every room I enter the same way I walked into that boardroom on a Tuesday morning in March, in a dress that meant business, with a phase 4 that nobody had seen coming. Because here's the truth. They can steal your strategy. They cannot steal your mind. They cannot steal the next idea, and the one after that, and the version of yourself that gets forged in the fire of having to fight for something you already earned. That part is yours. It was always yours. And no one gets to present it as theirs. Before you go, I want to hear from you. The most important comment you can leave me today is this: what would you have done in that hallway, in that moment when you realized what was happening? Would you have walked in and stopped it? Would you have waited, like I did? Or would you have done something completely different? Tell me below, because there is no wrong answer, and I genuinely want to know how you think. I'll be reading every single one.